I'm from South Africa, but live in Ethiopia. I'm a representative of the Baha'i International Community Office, and I'm also co-chair of the AU-EU Youth Working Group. Thank you.
On the specific program as bar leadership and a proud member of the Youth Democracy Commission. Have our students, okay, we don't need help, and we have Atapika, all right? Atapika means something else in Swahili, so we joked about the notes of So guys, this was another boring session, all right? And I love the fact that I can see myself in each and every one of you guys, all right? The youthful, yeah, energetic. And I love it. So we are all on social media on a Facebook, that's right? From the TikToks, the Instagram, and everything else. Again, it's not another boring session, but this is the session. And big shout out to APRM. Thank you so much. And thank you, of course, the APRM. So I have to give credit because that's why we're here today. And big shout out also to Youth Democracy Call, all right? So I'm here as your host, Aisha Wachiko, in case you're just joining in. And I am from Nairobi. Ooh, yeah. Ooh. I see you're being studied a lot in regards to process and everything. Yeah, but yeah, that's also just the reality of things that happen in our nation. So going back to social media, first of all, if you have your phone, if you still, if you're active on social media, we have two hashtags. One is the hashtag Voices Africa, and another one, the second hashtag is APRM Youth. All right. So let's also engage on social media. At the same time, we have seen this trend. I know it's about relationships. Yeah. So the hashtag is the bar is true. We know the bar is true. Yeah? Yeah? No? Yes? All right. So just explain a bit. Just explain a bit. So we have very interactive. Explain to them what it is. Yeah. So
So I'm just gonna get my for this number like it's what people can watch from us or how like
exactly. Exactly. So for example, the bar is to go when it comes to Christmas. Yeah. You know, right now, especially in the East African countries, the main presidential candidate ends up jailing the rest of the opposition. So the bar is that okay. So we can go around the bar, you know, it's just an interactive station. The bar is too low. So that's where we are at, right? And I love the fact that our station, so we get to say it without sugarcoating. The bar is too low. You have the mic, so turn on your mic and go. The bar is too low. Yes, yes, in any context. Because my country has more than 20 wives. The bar is too low. The bar is too low. We have a very good government in South Africa. Oh, love it. Gabon. That's the là-bas, moi, parce que nos discussions au Gabon ne peuvent pas laisser la place aux jeunes qui ont des compétences. All right. I think you guys are familiar with that in Cameroon. Yeah. Yes, well then.
we learn to go by president young Africa.
Tell us your country. Tell us your country. Tell us your country. Cameroon. The youngest ever. And the part-time call center. The bar is too low. Not a huge fan. Okay. Okay. Explain myself a bit more. Okay. So we all know that fragmentation has been the cause for the lack of development, right? It's on the colonial part. So I think we need to raise the bar for more unified, coordinated action. There are many people that are doing good things around the country, but there's so much fragmentation that in the absence of coordinated action, we will not be able to move forward as a whole. All right, so the bar is to go.
Okay, I would also like to add, so, I feel like for the most part, as it's the folks that are being, folks that are being especially it's always that sports. I think now more than ever want to involve the more active because there's so many activities that can apply on all levels. The but it's supposed the very ideas that we have of the lives which people that most for those who have access to both and now it's it's if they don't have the service and the best of because how that's
Oh, thanks. Well, my country provides to know that we have all the people currently as visible outcomes, occupying space that are meant to occupy by young people. I think that's it's not that the funds to know that there's no young people who have to go.
first others. I think even from the API, some what they are used, some that they feel like a simple caption. Okay, so the street looks like which was the not against it. The police not much and the against it and the against it but they think what even doing other things that the API against all the boards. Once API and yes, API, normal API, not making sure that the international structure. Thank you for the things API and put the structure problem. But them to then we look cover API paints alone, paints all the kinds of API processes and problem then make off keep on being. Yeah. I don't know when the API such countries this makes it I think it's but you do have people who are now being sure that
True. All right. Thank you so much for the interactive session. We're going to go. Okay. Go ahead. But it's to go. Yeah, that's so good.
He already has the 2007
Done.
been ruling for 39 years and seems like it's running again 2020.
I was about to say, Cameroon in Uganda, you can from a one. I remember the two hashtags that we are using. One is the voice of Africa and the other is APRM Youth. It's the country of Afro Barometer, Democracy Core, and APRM. This is the fifth, of course, African Youth Symposium. And we are talking about turning insight into action because it's we are not just numbers, right? We are beyond just data. Like what do they use? What is the use? What are, we are beyond just that, right? And I was meeting a joke earlier on with the speakers when we were talking about my opening statement. And you know, this forum that we have as youth when it comes to participation, inclusion, and all the forums about youth, it's more of a WhatsApp chat group that we have with our visitors about that particular vacation that we are supposed to take. But this vacation never makes it out of the group chat, right? Because what do they do with this information? So this information doesn't make it outside the WhatsApp group chat, and we need this data. We need the insights to make it outside of the WhatsApp group chat, right? About that. So allow me to welcome my first speaker. Give me a clap. Right? Like we need this to make it out of the WhatsApp group chat. So allow me to welcome our first speaker of the day, Marco, our communication coordinator for Southern Africa and Afro.
Good afternoon, everyone.
It is a great pleasure to be with all of you here today, and I will be sharing with you some insights from APRM on the priorities, evaluation, and expectations of African youth. But before we go any further, for the benefit of those of you in the audience who may be unfamiliar with APRM and our work, I'm just going to speak briefly about what it is that we do, who we are. We're a Pan-African, non-partisan survey research organization, and we provide reliable data on the experiences and evaluations of Africans on topics such as democracy, government, and quality of life. We have been doing this work the year 1999, and to date we have conducted surveys in up to 42 countries across the African continent. And why do we do the work that we do? Well, our goal is simple, and that is to give African citizens a voice in policy and decision-making processes across this continent. All right, so now we're going to hand the mic over very briefly to Leah, who's going to run us through a short session before we come back to APRM. Thank you. So please, as we said, it's going to be an interactive session, so take your phone and go to mentee.com. I hope you know the website. You can see it here, it's written up, and then you have to put the code 367255570, and we're going to play a little game to see what you think about the data of Afrobarometer and the Global Youth Participation Index. So I will just wait a few minutes so that you can join, and then we'll start. If you have any issues to access, let me know. So you go to mentee.com and you use the codes here for this here. Mentee.com. MEFENI. We have already 11 participants. Okay, shall we start? Okay, so I'm starting. We have 17 players ready. Okay. 6725570. Code 36725570. Can you see the questions? First question, so how many countries are covered by the GYPI? 145, 141, 135, or 130 for the GYPI, the Global Participation Index developed by the European Partnership for Democracy. What do you think? Okay, so 8 people have the right answer. So it's 141 countries that are covered by this index. So congrats to the ones that found it. Then next question. What are 4 dimensions of the GYPI? So you have 4 answers to give. Civic state, political affairs, social movement, election, socio-economic, or social movement. What do you think? Okay. Almost everyone voted. So as we can see, the correct answer is civic For those who just arrived, you can go on Nancy.com and there's the code that you have to put is upstairs. You can see it 36725570. Question. I want to clarify. We can continue. Right? No? Okay, well, it's okay. Let's stop it here. We had some technical issue. Alrighty, so where does APRM work? We started with the South African countries. So you can see on the map, which in red is where. But since then, we have expanded our reach across Africa, as you can see on the map. Let's move on to discuss our methodology very briefly. So we use nationally representative samples of adult citizens. So we interview voters, those aged 18 years and above. We conduct our interviews face to face and in the language of the respondent's choice. We use a standard questionnaire that allows us to compare across time and across countries. And we use sample sizes that range between 1,200 and 2,400 respondents, and this yields a margin of error of between 2 to 3 percentage points. So now let's get into the data. What are young Africans saying about democracy and the quality of government on the continent? So what the APRM findings show on support for democracy is that young Africans do want democracy. About 6 in 10 young Africans say that they prefer democracy to any other form of government. We also find that majorities of young Africans reject one-man rule. They also reject one-party rule, and they reject military rule. We also ask young Africans, in fact, all Africans, of course, about their satisfaction with democracy. And if we disaggregate this by age, we find that fewer than 4 in 10 of young Africans say that they are satisfied with the way that democracy works. So young Africans are dissatisfied with the performance of democracy. And this, as you can see from the map, is very similar to what their elders say about satisfaction with democracy. When we compare the views of young Africans as it relates to trust in leaders and institutions, we find that young people are less likely to trust their leaders and their institutions. So young people are less likely than their elders to say that they trust their president, that they trust members of parliament, and that they trust their local government council. And what about perceived corruption among leaders and institutions? On this, we find that youth are also more likely than their elders to perceive corruption among their leaders and in their institutions. So about 4 in 10 young Africans say that they perceive corruption in the office of the presidency, among members of parliament, and among their local government councillors. And then there's another question that we ask in our questionnaire.
which relate to whether armed forces should intervene in politics when leaders abuse their power. And on this question, we find that young Africans are more likely than their elders to endorse a military intervention. But there's a caveat to this, and this is when elected leaders abuse power. So more than half, that is 57% of young people, say that armed forces should intervene in politics when the country's leaders abuse power for their own ends. And then we also find that 1/3, that is 34% of young people, say that if the military were to ever intervene in government, they should plan a gradual transition back to civilian rule when the country is ready. And then 37% say the military should always restore civilian rule as soon as possible. Let's move on to political participation. Here we find that young people participate in civic activities at lesser rates than elders. This should come as no surprise. So young people are less likely to say they voted in elections, less likely to feel close to a political party, less likely to have contacted a political party official or contacted a member of parliament. But young people are also just as likely as their elders to say that they joined others to request action from government. They are as likely as their elders to have attended a demonstration or a march, and they are also as likely to have posted about politics on social media or contacted the media to share their views on some important issues. What are young people's priorities? So we find that on average, young people are they have more education than their elders, but they are less likely to be unemployed. They're more likely to be unemployed, sorry. We ask young people what they think the barriers to youth employment are. And here we find that young people are more likely to identify a lack of adequate training or preparation as a leading factor. Next in line is lack of experience required by employers. Third in line is youth unwillingness to work certain jobs. And if youth could work in any job sector that they wanted, what would they choose? Here we find that about half of young Africans say that they would want to start their own business. 1/4 would rather work in government or in the public sector, and about 1/10 say that they would work for a private company, industry, or business. And then on this question, if government could increase spending to help you, which areas should they prioritize? We find that almost half of all Africans say that job creation should be the primary prioritization. And on most important problems, young people identify health and unemployment as the leading priorities that their government should urgently address. And what are young people's perceptions of government performance on these priority issues? Here we find that on a number of metrics, including improving basic health services, maintaining bridges and roads, providing a reliable supply of electricity, etc., young people largely say that their governments are failing in these areas. And then we ask young people whether they've ever considered emigrating. Here we find that at least 45% of young Africans, this is adult Africans, have considered emigrating at least a little bit. And the desire to immigrate is highest in the Gambia, in Liberia, in Guinea-Bissau, where more than 2/3 of say that they have given thought to immigrate. And from that graph, you can see that youth are more likely than their elders to say that they have considered immigrating. And the reasons for immigrating, largely to find work and also to escape economic hardship and poverty. And what's the preferred destination for potential immigrants? Well, young people put Europe at the top of the list. Next is North America. And then third in line is the most prominent country in their region. Thank you so much for your attention, and I look forward to engaging as we continue on in the session. Thank you.
All right. So before I introduce my next speaker, I just thought about it. Like the guys know that our politicians and the government officials, they always think business abroad, right? Who else has thought about one? Like there's so many. The vice, according to even the data we've been given. Yes.
The five to know that schools have justifiable because like just to want to take for
Cameroon, Uganda, Kenya, hello. Yes, woo. You know, you guys keep on going. So next is speaker, and by the way, we have a question and answer. So just to relate, this is our station as young people, right? Clock it. That is the kind of language that we need. The all right. So introducing our next speaker from my motherland, he can tell you a bit about protest. Do you actually know about digital activism? Yeah, because we saw that's how it started in Kenya, by the way. All right. Do you know it's so effective that the government is now countering the hashtag that we use as system. So it was below the must go, the hashtag. So now it like with that they countered by saying must go to sit out. All right. So that is the kind of way that when it comes to digital activism, that the government is countering the hashtag by the so suppressing what the main message is supposed to be. All right, so introducing my countryman, Mikhail. How are you? I'm good as well. And Mikhail is going to take us through. Mikhail Yamwe representing the European Partnership for Democracy, and he's going to take us through how countries can, how data can be used to shape policies that empower young Africans. Good morning, good afternoon.
Right, thank you. And thank you also for being present. Statement. About that as well. And basically, what the participation is about, special how basically young people around the world are to keep back clients and also stuff. And this day I'll give an overview of what the data tells us about more specific that this one here from our and beyond this, we also discuss about why this matters and why and what of democracy. So broadly, what does this matter and what does it measure? So broadly, the global youth participation index that four key areas. First one, political affairs. So when we talk about political affairs, what are we really talking about? We're talking about the youth participation people. We're talking about representation, adequate representation. We're also talking about the youth participation in terms of forming a big part of political parties that have sound like youth. But we're also talking about youth in policy making in the context of the democracy. Another aspect that we look at as well is elections. Whether the youth can register and whether they have enough civic knowledge about how to register, and where exactly they're going to register, and what process it is that even their cousins back at the village of how they pick up their votes. So basically, that we look at elections. We also look at in terms of now during the voting day, at all level to vote free, and if they're able to put bill and the youth themselves also complete as candidates. So that's another aspect that we can. Third one is the civic space. As the youth speak, Aisha talked about at the first Kenya being cracked down upon the basis of their national. That curtails itself a bit of but also are able to organize, are able to get their interest process and also be able to engage online. Final one, just to that the social aspect. The last process is how the youth are able to application, how they actually so how they become affected. The index becomes scaled from 0 to 100. So a higher score basically means a stronger, freer, more open environment to participation. A lower score in this context of Sub-Saharan Africa doesn't necessarily mean that these things are not there. It simply means that, you know, the youth are facing additional barriers that they might have. And I think now I proceed to contextualize this around. And basically, what we're looking at a global perspective, the global average for within all these is one. Sub-Saharan Africa ranks that. And that is very telling. And I'm going to give more context. And Sub-Saharan Africa itself scores very high in terms of socio-economic factors. Like as Africa mentioned, we're the most educated one another. Structure that is correct. So 5%, 4.3%, which shows that, you know, basically, in terms of education, like I mentioned, the picture of about Kenya, for example, was what's called introduction to education. And because of that, we're able to get reports that over the past 20 years, many people need discussion levels. They were not able to pass. So Sub-Saharan Africa in general scores very low in terms of election. So the message here is very simple, that the youth are active, but the system has not. Because of this, they care. And because they care a lot, they tend to organize. They innovate, but access to people power. And I will show you a bit of regional pattern. As a researcher in this project, I decided to have a more study because we usually tend to, you know, incline ourselves towards the big states, Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, and Senegal. But I also chose to look at the smaller states like Shell, Asia, and Cabo Verde, as well as Lesotho, to simply show the distinctions that between the big states and what we call. And so those are the countries that I looked at. And what I concluded in this aspect is that official doors closed, you not be fine. And now I proceed. Now, I looked at Kenya, because this is when we started, at least in modern times, and post-COVID era where you can avoid that. And in Kenya, digital accountability come up with concept. So between last year and this year, we've seen how much that it has last year. This participation sometimes blur the line because it's a big side of democratic usually protests in Kenya would happen because of the but now the point that people organize online, get this both group eventually they finance last year. But that was the Kenyan case. Look at Nigeria as well. So there are two things had South Africa as well, hashtag must fall, must fall. We also had hashtag vote must fall. It was more, but also global issues. Senegal also had a very just dynamic in terms of how the youth music, how they use jokes like Kenya and South Africa itself, pass across a message and also to show how they can resist even through humor and through jokes and satire. Now, proceeding to the smaller states which I want to look into more specifically, there is often an assumption that nothing goes on in this small country. Don't look at what we see as smaller countries like Seychelles, like Cabo Verde, like Lesotho, but in actual fact, there's a lot that really goes on. In as much as they are smaller in terms of size, in terms of GDP per capita and GDP itself, you find that here participation by the youth is actually very vibrant, simply because the representatives themselves, the politicians and government officials, actually come to local levels to see and to talk to people. They hold consultative meetings, they hold advisory councils, simply to get to hear and understand what people on the ground are saying. And this is normally actualized even at parliamentary level. They listen to what people say and they operationalize the policy at national level. So you start to see this distinction between between the big states and the smaller states. That simply smaller states tend to feel more secure simply because of the proximity that they have. But larger states don't have that, and simply because they don't have that, the citizens themselves feel frustrated. They mobilize themselves online and take to the street. So their manner of interest articulation is very distinct. So in terms of, as I conclude, in terms of understanding these gaps that exist, Africa, like we've had yesterday, and I think also Kosazana talked about, is that the world's youngest region, over 60-70% of people are under 25. Yet most decision-making structures still left for education. And so because of that, where civic spaces tight participation shifts and online protests are there. Where economies struggle, youth build informal networks and innovation hubs. Progress in one area often supports another. Countries that protect civic freedoms also tend to have more competitive elections and stronger youth voting, just like we've seen the smaller states such as Seychelles, just Cabo Verde. And so this means inclusion cannot be peaceful, political, social. So these data really matter. It really matters simply because governments can track where progress lies and use this data that we are forming here to reform youth policies, election laws, and civic rights. Civil society can also use these numbers to change. Regional bodies such as the AU, the Pan-African Parliament itself can benchmark countries that share best practices, like coming to the people themselves. And also the youth themselves can use the data to show that their struggles are part of a wider continental pattern, which is backed by evidence, not just the emotions. And so this is what makes our work at UIPI very special. It translates activism into data and data into policy conversation. So what are the lessons that we can learn from this? That then they are very practical, that we can strengthen youth representation in parliaments and local government, that we can protect freedom of expression and digital rights, that we can expand civic education and participatory budgeting, but also we can support regional knowledge sharing, where successful reforms like what I discussed about was too young to run in Nigeria. And above all, governments must see youth not as a demographic challenge, but as a democratic advantage. So as I conclude, I take the view personally that Sub-Saharan Africa is not engaged. I simply think they are redefining the landscape of what engagement is like. Smaller states show that closeness breeds trust, but also larger states show that creativity sustains democracy. One simple meme can lead to history. The task ahead is to connect the two. I simply think to ensure that institutional reforms keep up the pace of this. As we like to say in this project, we should have with us that the gap is simply between potential and power, as opposed to the assumption that it's between youth and democracy. So our challenge, I think, as the youth is to try and minimize and narrow and close that gap to make sure youth participation is not temporary, it's not led by emotions or reactive, but lasting, expected, and embedded in governance. So I'd be very happy to engage further on this.
Thank you. That was really nice. A round of applause for us. For us at the Coding Club. We clap for South Africa. Yes. So that was Mika. Mika, by the way, is the lead researcher at the Global Youth Participation Index. All right. And we have Leah as well. So Leah Alena is a policy and program assistant at the European Partnership for Democracy. But for today, she is our game coordinator, our games officer.
Yes, exactly. So now we're gonna split into 3 groups because we're gonna do 3 games. So maybe we can have 1 game here, 1 game here, and 1 game in the back. So the first game that we're gonna do here is going to be with dice and about opportunities for you. So if you wanna do that game, you can stay here. Then, yes, we have a question.
Right. I can do 2 minutes. Just 2 minutes. All right. So one for Asafika, one for Mika, then we move, all right? Because you still have Melvin. Is that okay? All right.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so given a how we check what but how you define spreading content? How do you define that? Big time.
Please can I add up to that before you reply? Because I said one question. The reliability is talking about also how many the states that you get this data on. Do you have people that you work with from all those states, or you go into a certain country and then you don't have any locals that you work with? Because there's certain areas where if you're trying to get data, especially like maybe political, you're always going to get biased data. But there's some areas where the answer will never change. Whether people are struggling or they're not, the answer won't change. So do you have people that you work with who have this knowledge, or you just go in there as a international body?
Okay, so I see we have more, it was more than one, just 2 minutes. So let's do the game. And because with the game, you get to interact with the speakers. That's why we're dividing it into 3. All right, so it's also part of the interactive session. Let's just divide into 3, do the game, because you have a one-on-one, because one of the groups you're with Asafika, the other one you'll be with Mika, like the speakers are part of the group. Okay, so we do it at the end then, right? Yeah, so we're not like our African leaders. Okay, let's let's do them. Okay, go then. The bar is too low. Okay.
Thank you. Asafika, my question is the LSM breakdown for the questionnaire. So LSM is basically the economic in terms of the type of people they question, because I don't know, there seems to be a little variation in terms of saying the people are educated, but the youth claims that it's training and skills that they need to get jobs. So I just want to know the LSM, and maybe it will also help us better understand the responses.
there were hands there as well. And there's a hand here.
Okay, and I think mine is to the leadership there in terms of the one GYPI. So you said that, of course, we had to measure this space dimension in terms of participation, in terms of youth, and also you said that there is maybe 10 countries that they have still like a comprehensive national youth policy. But I would put it to you that, of course, for example, use SADC as an example of we do have a comprehensive national youth policy. That, of course, gives birth to the National Youth Council that we have. But we find that our National Youth Council themselves are ineffective, in which they now reduce the participation of youth that is particularly not in political movements that are within the civic space. So are you able to then now assess the effectiveness of the participation of those national youth councils in the governance and decision making at the broader level of national level? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. My question will be posed to Afika. Asafika. One of the things you alluded to in your presentation was that a lot of young Africans prefer democracy. But I find that to be a bit ironic in the sense that they prefer democracy, whereas majority of the African countries are not free according to the Freedom House Index, meaning that they are under authoritarian rule and under dictatorship. So how then can you say that you prefer democracy, whereas you never, for instance, you go to Uganda, you know that you're Museveni has been in power for, I don't know now, he wants to go for another term next year. You have Zimbabwe, where former President Robert Mugabe was in power for, I think, more than 3 decades, meaning that majority of these countries have never experienced democracy. So how they can you say you prefer democracy, whereas you have been under authoritarian rule your whole life? Unlike South Africa, where we can say some of us have never lived through apartheid, therefore we know what democracy is like, and we can say that we prefer democracy. But countries such as, for instance, Zimbabwe, countries such as Uganda, in Cameroon, you can never say that you've experienced democracy. So, yeah, I'm sure you get what my question. Thank you.
Everyone, my name is Paramadi Sakili Panza. I have a question for leadership. I just want to ask for your is it a viable solution to opt for not the evidence that have
Thank you guys so much. So kindly go through the answers so that for the response. Allow me to introduce our final speaker, Melvin. As we let the previous speakers, Asafika and Mikael, kindly go through the questions for shorter answers this time. So allow me to welcome Melvin Songwe, humanitarian CEO of United Youth Organization, Deputy Speaker, African Youth Parliament, National Vice President of Cameroon, National Youth Council, and an aspiring politician. He's very particular about that. He is also the chief marketer of Limboom indigenous language, and is supposed to teach us a bit of that today. And, he's going to be speaking about how data and dialogue can inspire youth participation and policy impact. Karibu sana Mel.
Thank you very much. When I say Wesake, you say Metayuka. Wesake. Wesake. Sure. Okay, sorry, somebody signed, so I'm going to come back to English. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Melvin Songwe is my name. As you all heard, no need to reintroduce. I'm so particular about young people's decision making. But I'm sure that my colleagues have done a lot. In fact, it's like they find into my presentation. So I'm going to just briefly talk about what I have, and be rest assured that the presentation can be shared. So you have it and you can follow it at your convenience. Thank you very much. This presentation, I am presenting on the recommendations on digital rights and democracy, which are youth-centered for a global future and an embodiment of diverse co-funded partners under the digital democracy agenda of the youth democratic cohort and the network of over 650 youth organizations, which I would advocate that you have the documents, IT materials in front of you. I recommend that if you are not part of the youth democratic cohort, you should join and benefit because I am here under the banner of one of the partners from youth democracy cohort. Thank you very much. I did not tell us that we as young people constitute 60% of the global population in Africa within the ages of 15. Of course, maybe I should go. They made me go back. The baby up to about 35 years, which means that if you take the decision and be right that yes, it's time for young people, not only sit at the table, but on the table. True or true? Hello? 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 I feedback that maybe somebody got it. Maybe I'm French. Should I? Okay. I want us to look at things from perspective of I have my presentation on 8 something. I'm going to talk particularly on 3 something because my colleagues talked about different things concerning other something that as I said, the problem that barometer is going to share my presentation, not all of the presentation. And so one thing I want us to have an understanding of is that young people, as somebody said, are so eager and interested in political participation, democracy. But now the problem is that we don't, first of all, we are fed up at some point because those who are there already, they have a problem. And we are asking ourselves that there is no need for us wanting to go somewhere where we know that the road is not clear. They say the education is what? Education is key to, we are not attentive, maybe. Education is key to success, but when we go to school, finish, we're asking for the keys, we don't have it. It's the similar thing. It's the similar thing that we have as far as democracy is concerned. And we are looking at the possibilities of seeing how to break out of it, break that silence, and we move further. Of course, the scotches of connectivity restrictions, we know very well that most countries in Africa, when elections, they are like, oh, there will be no internet for 1 week, or sometimes even 1 month. Sometimes even extend. Are we together? And this happens in many other countries. So we are asking ourselves, what can we do as young people? Because I want us to be so much interested in ensuring that the mechanisms that have been put in place should be able to take actions in ensuring that, like my country, one of the frontliners that was advocating the fact that they should be internet before the elections. We started talking about it, and in fact, I actually received some messages and some calls, and I said, it is part of my job. I've been saying it before, it is now. Check. It's not today that you're here. Maybe it's now becoming new to you because we are saying it now and emphasizing on the fact that and you know what happened? The internet was there, but it's like putting data, and at the end of the day, your data is finished, and you don't know where to go. You're not able to ask. So we are looking at this and asking ourselves, what can we do to ensure that longer an occurrent situation in most of our countries. It may not be happening. We want to be sure that the global issues that are affecting young people and us, particularly concerning the creative process principles, we should be intentional about it. And there are always justifications when there are these restrictions. And this justification about the online freedom of expression, right to information, you see that those are violated because they don't even look at it. It's a big problem. Permit me talk about lack of data protection and surveillance. Talking about lack of protection, data protection, you'll understand that there are gaps. And the gap in application is because there are a lot of laws that have been made. Yes, we ask of the laws that have been put in place all over our countries, and they should have a lot of laws that have been put in place, but there are gaps when it comes to application. Some of us don't even know. How many of us know about the laws in our countries that have digital rights? How many of us are aware? Please, yes, more than half of the world don't even know. You should check and go online and check. And if you don't see it online and you're not sure, don't say anything about it because it's a technical issue. You may go somewhere, you're talking and reference it and say this when you're not aware and the law will just be at your doorstep. Ignorance for the law is no excuse. We talk about repression focus. We talk about citizen awareness, as I said. We are not, most of us are not aware about those laws. Existing frameworks, yes, there are existing frameworks. And so what? We see countries like Chad, in their law, they have frameworks that have been put in place, but there are limited. The frameworks are already conceived. There are not even, they are there, but they need to be support. Is there somebody from Chad here? Nobody. But I think in our global recommendation, we have to talk about that. Let us go to access to public information and open government. We know very well that there are transparency barriers. True. We know very well that there are promising reforms. True or the other two? Excuse me, my Minister of Communication. We equally have implementation gaps, as I rightly said, legislative participation. You will see that when it comes to issues of data, we are not even aware of it. We don't even know whether which one this public information is not even given to us. And sometimes it doesn't have to be given to us. We need to take it. And by so doing, is not riot or use the other way around. You should be political as well when you are asking or you want to advocate for something. Because all of this, if you want to know the laws of your country, don't bother yourself going to ministries. Go to the parliamentarians. Sometimes maybe some of them may just be hand clappers in parliament. But I will tell you that with APRM, it's clear. I'm giving this as a recommendation. But the advocacy should be that the countries should be looking at what can be done to ensure that the data is not only hidden, but is given to everybody. So let me go to the key recommendations. Why? And the first of it is I want to talk about global African policy recommendations, regional and continental. And I have 6 recommendations. Please put your heart here. Put your heart from wherever it is, bring it here. What this is the reason why we're here. And I'm talking about African Union and other mechanisms in place. And what we are advocating for as a recommendation. These recommendations, before I forget, are from different countries, from about 8 to 10 different countries. They gave this recommendation, and we managed to summarize it to this few. And these are things which we want to see that in other seeking different mechanisms, we should be able to have discussions going around it. and you bear with me that African Union, we want that they should promote an African Charter on digital rights guaranteeing the balance between security and freedom of expression. It is a problem, a common problem with most of our countries. We want to promote a continental protocol on prohibition of internet shutdowns during election periods in partnership with REX. This has to be very particular. We want to launch an African digital rights barometer, regularly assessing countries on data protection, freedom of expression, and access to information. True. From the challenge that I said over there, we should see that this is very important recommendation that should be put in place. Let's go to ECOWAS here and others. Condition electoral support and technical cooperation upon a written commitment from member states to refrain from internet shutdown during election. This is now at the continental level, and we want that this should be done. Establish a regional monitoring mechanism for internet restriction and abusing related to cybersecurity laws that are there, but we want to make sure that these are well placed. Harmonize regional legal frameworks on data protection and cybersecurity. These are some of the recommendations which we want to be sure, we want to insist on that discussion should be going around, and a call to action for all of us. We should support youth-led policy dialogue and commit to translating data-driven evidence to inclusive national and regional policy. And before I end my people, the call for open democracy is not just discussion on paper. We want action, and we want inclusive action for everybody. Thank you very much. And I am done.
Well, you didn't tell me we were going to have a performance, but okay, well, it's your over, right? Yeah. So, like, these conversations have to make it outside of the WhatsApp group, right? Like, it's true. It's a whole thing. Anyway, guys, the hashtags to use, then again, kindly go on your phone and type, just very good, according to the discussion we're having. And the hashtags to use, the two, one is Voices Africa, and the second hashtag is APRM Youth, all right? And we had the questions, but before that, we can take questions for Melvin as well. So he can write them down and figure out the answers because of the time. And then we're going to get into some very quick exercise. Any questions towards Melvin? Yes. And then the far end.
Thank you once again, Chair. The point that I actually, or rather the question, my question is in line with the access to the internet during elections. I think this is a very huge barrier in a lot of African countries that are under authoritarian rule. And I'm going to make reference again to Uganda in 2021, when Bobby Wine was contesting President Yoweri Museveni and subsequently jailed, and the internet was shut down. The question I want to pose is, in South Africa, for instance, we have what we call Chapter 9 institutions. Like, we have an electoral commission, which does have some, I would say, inconsistencies here and there, but I believe it's one of the best within this region that we're in compared to Zimbabwe and Mozambique, for instance. Aren't there any institutions within, for instance, Cameroon, where you're from, whereby during elections, there is a freedom of association and freedom of expression, institutions that ensure that, for instance, like I said, in South Africa, we have Chapter 9 institutions, such as your public protector, even, which are there to ensure that balance of power and that there's no institution or arm of the state that overrides the other. So, aren't there mechanisms within your country military that are there to protect democracy and to ensure that even during elections, things such as shutting down of the internet, which is a total, I would say, obliteration of freedom within your countries, because militarization of elections is another issue, which even leads to people now being coerced to vote for a certain individual or a certain party instead of actually going to the ballot box and voting for people who they want. And I think this is also interconnected to what I said earlier on, that some young African people cannot claim that they prefer democracy when they've never experienced. So thank you.
Thank you so much to all the presenters. Actually, my comment and question is based on what everyone has shared. So I think we can see that it's not just about bringing young voices into old systems. It's about reconceptualizing systems of governance. And maybe one specific system is that of knowledge sharing. So a very practical question is, what do you feel is needed to ensure that decision-making mechanisms are process-oriented, non-tokenistic, intergenerational, and ensures coherence between grassroots insight and national engagement?
Thank you so much. My name is Miguel. Like, it's like digital private. Government action, with censorship by the government. And secondly, the also rise of foreign digital media platforms, the likes of tech that are operating in a number of different countries. But again, they are embedding accountability, digital right, which is like that. The argument has always been they don't have physical presence in those countries, and therefore they don't take responsibility. My question would be, because there's something that I wanted to but I've seen it here actually approaching it at a regional level. But again, how do we navigate that issue of these regional blocks again becoming cabals and conferences that are operating together in unity? We saw the other day, I mean, Tanzania, you condemned the election, but AU congratulated the president. How can we navigate that particular point? And lastly, most of the government are cheating. I mean, they are passing some of these legislations and framework, but again, when it comes to implementation, they are infringing on individual rights in the name of national security. That in a democracy, define an information that is national security.
Thank you so much. That is currently what is happening to us in Kenya. All right. And then one more.
Hi, greetings. My name is Jordan. Yeah, so my question is, and it was kind of hard when you mentioned promote an African charter that on digital rights, guaranteeing the balance between security and freedom of expression. And then you went to ECOWAS and said condition electoral support and technical cooperation. And I'm going to piggyback from the last speaker with the fact that we talk about Tanzania, the observation mission came and said that the president and the electoral system did not put on the recommendations that they recommended for the last elections. So we're seeing an implementation gap again. So now I see here remedying maybe your repression focus, but how do we then remedy the implementation gaps? Because there are dictators who come in the sense of democracy who do not implement the very recommendations that have been made by the peer review or by AU. We're seeing a misalignment and a disproportion when it comes to speaking because AU, the president is saying, yes, well done for the election, but the observation mission says this was not free and fair election. Can we put one more?
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's the last. But mine is on data security. I see that the advocate
Can you add your voice for $5,000 for later? I can't get it.
sure. Yeah, and I want. But look, I was saying mine is on data security because I can still think about international rights barometer, assess countries in terms of data protection. But I wanted to know that with this barometer that you want to launch, also look into the back end which our institutions safely and do the survey because I can tell you after barometer probably survey saving data so that I can see. So I'm basically questioning us about back end from other areas, but which is on our way forward. That's what I'm.
All right, so we'll get to the answers, starting with Asafika, and then Mika, and then Melvin. We'll finish with you. As we do that also, which recommendations based of the last Melvin and his presentation, which recommendations are important according to your national context? We'll finish up with that because it's going to go into the Africa Governance Report for 2020. All right, so let's get to the answers. Africa, starting with you.
Thank you, Aisha. I have a lot of questions that I have to respond to, but I'm going to try and be as brief as possible. If you feel like I haven't adequately answered your question, you can probably find me later. You can go into greater detail. But I like the point that you mentioned about funders, and I'd like to start there. You mentioned the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and actually Afrobarometer is on a drive to get Africans to invest in the project of building credible data for this continent. And as an organization that is pioneering work in that area, we are really trying to move strongly into getting African organizations, philanthropies involved in investing in our work. And that includes you as individuals. So we're really trying to push really hard in that area. This data is for Africans. We want Africans to be able to use it for their advocacy efforts and for their work, because we're working to provide an evidence base for stakeholders in various spheres. And I'm going to move into the question around partnership. So in every country where Afrobarometer has a presence, we work with a local partner. We refer to them as national partners. They are based in country and they have local expertise. So there's not a single country where Afrobarometer has a presence where we just come in and exert ourselves in the space or in the environment. There's no such thing. We rely on local expertise. And in fact, we have a team dedicated to capacity building. We believe very strongly in training our national partners to be able to carry out this work effectively. And on the topic of capacity building as well, we are on a big drive to train young Africans in particular on how to utilize our data. So if you're interested, please go to our website. We run summer schools. We have training programs that we host in various universities across the African continent. So maybe you want to check that out. On the issue of the reliability of our data, I don't want to get too much into the statistics, but I will say that we use a survey methodology that is called probability proportional to size sampling, right? And our data is or falls within a 95% confidence level interval. So that's just some numbers. And I told you earlier on that our data has a margin of error of between 2 to 3 percentage points. Those are just some of the numbers. But I don't want to get too technical. What I will say is that another thing that is admirable about APRM is that our data is a public good. So we're very transparent about how it is collected and how we do the work that we do on the field. So you are all very welcome to go onto the APRM website to read up on how we collect our data. And we also have a tool called the online data analysis tool, where you can do your own analysis of the data, country by country. So as I said earlier, you can compare across country and over time. We've been doing this work since the year 1999. So there is a whole bank of information that you can find on the website. So we're very transparent about how we do this work, and you're welcome to read more about it.
All right. We have 5 more minutes. All right. Please, you can find Asafika because we also need to break. Mikael, please. 2 minutes. No?
So someone asked about the viable solution. Previous for others cut some fast over someone who is but if you pass it across to the team or the job that we have, I can see it about the Kenya, war for that's what I think. So through that how for it what's going on. For instance, the directive for the president talking about that. So someone able to, and then there are multiple things that people were really angry at that. But if that was passed across the stuff, then not many people really understand. So I would find that basically Kenya had newspapers, it will be given under but every Sunday smoking stuff that affects Ghana. That is the only way how much people get to understand what it is. Finally, someone asked also about the competitive national. I think there's a lot of so I think that more about that back then, if it is about I would think that it can take into account.
All right. So that Melvin, we have 2 minutes. Seconds, huh? All right. All right. Please.
Thank you you very much. Just to make us understand that we are very much aware that there are a lot of legal frameworks that have been put in place. A lot, both at the continental and regional level, with all the discussions we are having around here. What we are advocating for is that they should give us, it should be put into action. And then putting them into action, we are thinking as well that there should be a draft monitoring mechanism, which will go around all the countries when there are elections to ensure all these internet shutdowns are all devices. And it's true that it's possibly impossible, but it's possible. So what we are doing is advocate, and we are doing advocate, and so we cannot be enforcing that it should already be taken into action because it's something which we're looking forward that we should work in the future. I'm saying this to mean that Cameroon have a National Communication Council for the Principal Act if there is not a regulatory body, and that Communication Council is there to ensure that there is mutual understanding between the government and the digital rights defenders and others. So much such that we have a level ground to do a lot of things. So that is that, and let us understand that these recommendations are still at the level of recommendation, and we see how they are progressing in the weeks, the months ahead. Thank you very much.
All right, I think you're ready to be a politician. You said seconds and minutes. The bar is too low, eh? All right, guys, just need to hear from you so that we break for lunch. But thank you so much for such an interactive session. And just quickly, for someone who's really quick with their microphones, which recommendations are important according to your national context? Anyone who's very quick with their mic, can lead us. Yeah, just be quick with your mic, and that's it.
Andrew Songo from Kenya, but my recommendation would transcend country and also go continentally because I was provoked by that very insightful comment. I think one core recommendation for me would be our regional economic community organizations and our African Union need to beyond 3 months of paradigm engagement to actual 3 months of philosophy of public participation. Public participation are judged on inclusiveness, on effectiveness and responsiveness. That even though you open up spaces to engage with your citizenry, those spaces should be inclusive in terms of the diversity of what the continent has to offer, youth, elderly, etc. It also has to be effective in the sense that you must that it would actually translate into the policy-making process, and responsive in the sense that there's an accountability that citizens will actually look at the output of policy making and say, indeed, it was worthwhile investing in participating in these processes because we then have groups and dreams within our policy process. Of course, that can transcend also to accountable.
All right. Thank you so much, Andrew.
I just want to say quickly that we're sort of becoming like a typical representation of current African government. From the main hall, we kept emphasizing the idea of having a very engaging conversation so that then we establish what are some of the solutions, because we understand the problem. It's beautiful that we had statistics and the presentation, but we understand the problem. And I think the idea was, can we draw our attention to some of the solutions? So for me, my recommendation is it possible that the government and those in charge start to implement these legal frameworks and all the recommendations that are in place? Because we have, at this point, almost adequate, legislation in countries and the entire continent. Talk of the Africa Free Trade Area Agreement and so on. We have the framework, but the implementation is not happening. And so can we move to implementation? And then from that implementation, we're going to see movement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please keep your recommendations in the group. Let us continue the discussion in the group. So if you have a question or you have recommendations, please drop it there. We're going to be very, very, very keen in responding to your question. And please do not forget to join YDT by using the digits on your table. Thank you very much. And we are open for further discussion.
For me, I think one of the things that I'll put forth as a recommendation taking a more mediatory and arbitrary posture towards some of the challenges that are facing the continent, because like one of the speakers said that in the recent election in Tanzania, the EU condemned what had transpired there, where the EU congratulated the president. So we can always, for instance, even what is happening in, for example, Gaza, whereby the United Nations declared that there's a genocide that is happening there, whereas but another body, which is multinational, actually did the opposite. So I think the AU needs to start taking a posture that is more mediatory and arbitrary in its approach to certain things that are transpiring in the continent, be it that it's unfair elections, or be it that there's a suppression or repression measures that are being used against civilians.
Thank you so much for all your submissions. And just want to add on to what Michael has said earlier on, like in Kenya, I think so many things have been happening to us, like bad things always happening to good people. And that, like, with a meme, then it's go time when it comes to a process. And there's something that is a very key, like a key meme. So our protest used to happen on Tuesdays and on Thursdays. But there's this meme from a certain politician saying, get ready, get ready, get ready, get ready, get ready. So whenever you see that, it's full time. And there was also one more that was very ready for Tuesday. I am very ready for Tuesday. So that was also just another meme, a reference, to make it light over the moment. And thank you so much for submission, for interaction. And just keep on going as well. We are still around, the speakers are still around to answer your questions. Lunch is also ready and up. Okay. Maybe final word is the APRM rapporteur in the building with that. Just raise your hand. All right. Maybe give us your name again and tell us your name so people are aware.
My name is Giselle Bagan.
Yeah. Has it closed?
Those who do not get a chance to respond to the ATR youth presentation, can you please take 7 minutes to respond?
All right. So that's all we have. You guys don't the bar is too low, but we can definitely raise it. Sindio means yeah? Yeah. All right. Bye, guys. Enjoy your lunch and see you around as well.